Story 1. The sounds of flames crackling when you do not have a fireplace and are not camping. Story 2. My pet caiman, Pookie, was slithering over the top of his tank fence. He was not malicious, but he did seek warmth, and I was sleeping nearby, naked. Not something you want to roll over onto in the night. Story 3. Someone was ringing my doorbell at 4 a.m., repeatedly at regular intervals. I did not answer. Story 4. A red fox barking sounds like the scream of someone being murdered. Story 5. The sound of a dog about to vomit. Nothing wakes you up faster from a deep sleep than that. Story 6. 15 years old. Backpacking in Western Washington in the 1970s. There were no cell phones in those days, and I was the oldest of 3. We were just going to bed, letting the fire die out when a cougar screamed very close to our camp. Our fire did not die down for a few hours after that. I have heard cougars screaming since then, and it still makes my blood run cold, but nothing like that first time. Story 7. Stray cats in heat vocalize loudly to attract male cats. Story 8. Raccoons fighting over apples in the woods around my house. Story 9. Hearing our dog barking incessantly in the middle of the night, something he had never done before, and my husband hearing tapping on a window. I never did figure out what that was. I am not sure I want to know. Story 10. Many years ago, when I got my first apartment, I would hear a baby screaming and crying at all hours of the night. It was very terrifying. My boyfriend came over one night, and when I heard it, I jumped out of bed and screamed. There it was, the crying. Did you hear it? Turned out to be foxes. Story 11. I was about 14 years old, returning home on foot in the middle of the night, around 2 or 3 a.m. For the first time in my life, I heard a cat in heat making characteristic noises. I was very scared because the sounds were so human-like. The cat was behind some bushes, so initially, I didn't understand what was happening. Fortunately, I wasn't alone. The girl with me started laughing and explained that it was just a cat. Story 12. The child I was babysitting ran into my room screaming loudly. Story 13. I was sleeping in the loft of my cabin with the window open. It was lightly raining and cool. Then, 20 yards away, lightning struck a sycamore tree. It was a blinding flash through my eyelids, and the sound was huge. Not just loud but ground shaking. I went from sound asleep to completely awake in a fraction of a second. Then it was completely dark again, and I couldn't see a thing until I fumbled for my flashlight. I had so much adrenaline that I couldn't go back to sleep until after dawn. Story 14. A lady screaming. I live in a strange little pocket in town. It is isolated and wild, and the way the streets are arranged, there is no through traffic. One evening around 9 or 10, I was half-heartedly watching something on TV when I heard a woman scream bloody murder. Every hair on my body stood up. I jumped from the chair, grabbed my rifle, and ran outside, thinking some horrible fate had befallen someone. I stood there looking into the tree-lined silence. Then I heard the scream again, closer this time. It was so loud it nearly scared me into losing control. I looked up, and there was an owl just sitting there on a branch, minding its own business, screaming like a woman in a slasher film. It was the weirdest combination of terrified and stupid I have ever felt. Story 15. My dog used to love ripping up stuffed animals. I would get them for her at garage sales for pennies so she could have some fun. One time, I got her a Teletubby stuffed toy. For some reason, she liked it and decided not to rip it up. About a week later, in the middle of the night, my wife and I were woken up by a creepy, high-pitched soft voice saying, "Oh," kept repeating every few minutes and scared us. This continued for the next couple of nights. We both thought it was an actual haunting. Eventually, we realized that the Teletubby doll had that recording built in, and our dog was bringing it into her dog bed at night, triggering the voice. Story 16. A poster falling in your bedroom in the middle of the night. Bonus if it is on your ceiling above the bed and it is falling on you. Story 17. The wind blew the trim that came loose from the trailer. I thought someone was breaking in. Story 18. Camping and hearing a bear grunting and shuffling just out of eyesight. Never did see him, though. Story 19. A methamphetamine laboratory explosion a block away. I physically felt the boom. Story 20. Something whooping on top of my tent in the middle of the night in Florida startled all of us awake, and my toddler immediately began crying. It was just so loud. Story 21. The click of my wife locking the door after she sent me outside to investigate the first scary sound. Story 22. My own screaming from night terrors. Thankfully, I grew out of it, but sometimes I used to wake myself up with my own blood-curdling screams. The worst part was the whole experience before the screaming. Story 23. We used to have a cat with a cat flap so it could come in and out of the house during the night. Our cat decided to bring us gifts in the form of small creatures she caught, like mice. One night she brought in a frog. Turns out frogs can scream. My wife and I were awoken by a quiet but high-pitched screaming noise downstairs. We did not think it was quiet at the time because you do not typically scream quietly. It sounded more distant but still within our house. I went downstairs where we had wooden flooring and saw blood spread across the hall. I could still hear screaming, now coupled with the sound of our cat running around the dining room, trying to injure and play with the dying frog. I had to wait until the cat had pretty much killed the frog and had it in her teeth to put them both outside. But just imagine not knowing frogs can scream, hearing that in the night, and going downstairs to find blood everywhere. It also turns out frogs bleed a lot. Story 24. One of those loud audio hallucinatory bangs you hear, where you are convinced it was something in the house. Story 25. If you are alone in the middle of the woods camping at midnight and have never heard a deaf person singing, be ready for a ride. Story 26. In recent memory, there was a large boom. It turned out to be a flashbang. The police were conducting a raid on the house across the street. My house had front row seats. Story 27. Woken up in bed by a huge explosion. I thought it was a plane crash. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding, ready to grab my dog and run. I looked out the window, nothing, the neighborhood was quiet. I had experienced episodic cranial sensory shock, also known as exploding head syndrome. It has happened to me a few times now. It is very frightening. Story 28. I thought it was a couple of trucks Jake breaking. Nope. Just my ex-stepdad deflating from that night's beefaroni. My mother couldn't catch a break. At the time, my two brothers and I slept in the same bed. They were 3 and 5 years old, so they took up a lot of room. Mom would come and sleep in our bed. The 3-year-old would start it off and wake us all from a dead sleep. The boys slept between me and Mom. Then I would start and fire off a rump rumbler that would wake the boys, and my mother would reach over and slap me for farting and the smell. Plus, I would be laughing so hard. She'd always say, "There's a lady in here." The 5-year-old broke my mother's nerves. She survived about 2 hours. She would go sleep on the couch, and of course, the 3-year-old wanted to go sleep under her. He would go out there to sleep, but kept farting at least 3 times. She kept throwing him back in the bed, but he kept going back out. My poor mother. Story 29. Last week, a transformer in my neighborhood exploded during the night. It shook the area and caused a power line to fall. We didn't have Wi-Fi for almost a day, and I was bored. I was very startled when I heard it blow during the night. I thought it was a bomb. Story 30. A drunk college student climbed up to my fire escape balcony at 3 in the morning, and it scared me. I heard a sound and looked. When I turned around again, I saw a man standing in front of me on the 3rd story. The only person more scared than me was him when he saw me. Once I realized what was happening, I opened the window and let him walk through my apartment to the elevators. Story 31. Bobcat fighting a raccoon in the woods before dawn. Most terrible sound I have ever heard. Story 32. A pack of coyotes was killing something in the middle of the night in my suburban neighborhood. Whatever animal it was took too long to die. The shrieking was horrifying, coupled with the howls and yips of the coyotes. It sounded like they were torturing it to death. Story 33. When my sick child with a high fever started laughing maniacally in the middle of the night, I questioned whether possession was real. They sat up straight, stared at me with a huge smile, and laughed like a maniac. Scared me a lot. Story 34. The sound of my bedroom door clicking open. Life pro tip: open windows cause drafts, which can cause doors to pop open depending on how they were closed. Of course, at the moment I did not reflect on this fact and immediately thought of some combination of burglars and demons. Story 35. My vibrator turned on unexpectedly and started vibrating in the drawer. Story 36. My house is shaking due to an earthquake. We usually lie quietly until we figure out how big it is. It is terrifying, to be honest. We have been waiting for the major earthquake for decades. It is going to happen sooner or later. Story 37. I used to rent a guest house on a large property in Napa and took my dog out for a quick walk before bed. I turned the corner in a dark part of the yard and heard a bobcat growl at us from about 40 feet away. I lost a shoe hightailing back inside. Story 38. Setting: you live alone. It is 3 a.m. You hear what sounds like a baby babbling angrily. Obviously, there are no babies in your house. You get up to investigate, and your cat, a Maine Coon mix with tortoiseshell fur, has decided she needs to tell the cat or dog that has come to your back porch off. Story 39. A couple of weeks ago, I was woken up in the middle of the night by "Daddy, I don't feel well," followed by prolonged vomiting sounds. I cleaned up the child and put them back to bed, then still had to clean up the vomit. I finally got to bed around 4 a.m., then suddenly remembered I don't have children. Story 40 happened twice. The first time, my roommate brought home her drunk restaurant manager. I woke up to him peeing on our pantry door. When I yelled, he moved to the oven. The second time was at a cottage after a house party. I practically had to tackle the guy away from a computer. Story 41. I was lying in bed and my door was slightly cracked. I was just about to drift off to sleep when I heard a loud bang, as if my door was being kicked in. When I opened my eyes, my door was completely open. At first, I was furious because I thought my siblings had kicked in my door and woken me up. But when I stomped out of my room demanding to know who did it, they all looked confused and then started laughing. Turns out both of my cats ran into my door because they wanted to get in so badly. I'm just glad it wasn't locked, or they probably wouldn't be alive. Story 42. The sound my sleep paralysis used to make when I was a child. Story 43. Coyotes in the night nearby when you know your neighbors have outside cats is pretty scary and sad. Another scary sound that frightened me was when I was visiting family in Canada during the fall. I heard a weird scraping sound in the middle of the night. I fumbled to put on my glasses and went downstairs to where there were larger windows. It was a buck scraping the velvet off his antlers. It was pretty cool to see once I was sure there was no person trying to break in. Story 44. Gunshots occurred while loading a truck in a poor part of Dallas, also known as Mesquite. Story 45. My poor quality Eufy brand smart doorbell will randomly ring with nobody there. Usually, it happens around 3 a.m. and wakes us from a deep sleep. I check it out and return frustrated with Eufy. We both feel uneasy and agitated and cannot go back to sleep. Story 46. One of my coworkers called out for me on my night shift. She is the living and breathing representation of a toddler stuck in the body of an older woman who is completely unhygienic. She has manic episodes quickly, never left her Y phase, does not remember anything ever, has zero filter on all levels, and wants to be your shadow at all times. I die inside every time. Story 47. I used to live right behind Disneyland. They have a fireworks show every night at 9:30, which was fine, but sometimes they would have a special event, and fireworks would go off at midnight or even later. I have to get up for work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I am woken up from a deep sleep by what sounds like a war going on over my house. I know it is nothing harmful, but try waking up to that. Story 48. Some years ago, after the end of Christmas vacation, when we had to return to school, I couldn't fix my sleeping schedule. For 2 weeks straight, I would get about 4 hours of sleep per night and started experiencing sleep paralysis. I knew what it was, and every time it happened, I kept my eyes shut because I did not want to see any hallucinations, but I heard many things like laughter or voices. The most terrifying experience was one night while I was trying to fall asleep. I realized I couldn't move, and then I heard someone whispering right next to my ear. It felt so real that I could swear I felt a breath on my ear. Story 49. My friend experiences night terrors and we were traveling in Japan at the time. The hotel itself felt unsettling and was located in the middle of the mountains. She had a night terror, and I woke up from a deep sleep to a blood-curdling scream right next to me. I immediately woke up, thinking there was someone in our hotel room attacking us. After the most terrifying 10 seconds of waking, I realized she was asleep and gently shook her awake. I have never been more terrified and relieved at the same time. Story 50. I set a ringtone for a friend of mine using music from a Castlevania game and promptly forgot about it. Flash forward to 2 a.m., and I wake up screaming because I do not know where the terrifying music is coming from. I thought I had woken up in a horror movie. Story 51. My dog was growling at the corner of the room, but nothing was there. Story 52. Scout trip. Wolves or wild dogs, a lot of them closing in. Story 53. A rabbit being killed by either coyotes or foxes. Terrible little screams. Story 54. I had heard the barred owls behind me hooting, but I had never heard the cackling they do when they all get together and start making noise. I had no idea what animal was doing that, and it woke me out of a deep sleep because I had my windows open. I thought it was some weirdos on bath salts about to break into my house. Story 55. Doorbell. That sound even scares me during the day if I am not expecting any visitors. Story 56. I feed my scorpions hornworms, and they do not always eat them. If the hornworms can find a cozy place and cocoon themselves, after a while they turn into hawk moths, which are quite large. One night, one of those hornworms emerged from its cocoon and began trying to escape. Imagine my surprise when a giant hawk moth went absolutely ballistic inside my scorpion's tank at 3 a.m. I do not own any pets with wings. Story 57. I was about 10 years old. We lived across from a forest. I heard a woman scream over and over again. I didn't know what to do. Stopped and I fell asleep. I described it to my dad in the morning, and he said, "Fox." Story 58. Coyotes sound like an evil witch cackling outside your window. I literally froze when I heard it, thinking I was suddenly in a horror movie. Story 59. The sound of my grandmother's femur snapping in the room next to me and her screams when I was 8. Story 60. My parents were in the room down the hall when I was 10. Story 61. One night, I heard a creepy sound in the closet each time I breathed. Even a small breath caused that sound. It was as if a monster in the closet was mimicking my breath. Story 62. My mom has nightmares. My father was abusive to all of us, but she suffered much worse than my brother or me. She has never been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, but I have no doubt she has it. When she has one of those nightmares, she screams, "No!" and begs for the person in her nightmare to stop. I have woken her up during a nightmare to try to help her, but she becomes very combative, as if she is still trying to defend herself. She has injured me on multiple occasions, so I only wake her up now if the nightmare seems particularly distressing. Fortunately, the nightmares have become less frequent over the years, but I hate that she has ever had to endure this. Story 63. Hick, hick, hick. So, trying to guess which cat is throwing up where? Story 64. When I was 11 years old, we lived 16 miles outside of Pueblo, Colorado, near where the old Pinion truck stop used to be. There is now a rest area close to the exit. One night, I woke up for no reason to find my beagle dog at the foot of my bed, growling very low and quiet. I lay still. I heard the whispering sound of clothes swishing as someone walked. I watched as a man stood in the doorway to my sister's and my bedroom, then walked down the hall. He did the same to my parents' and brother's bedrooms before leaving with the quiet click of the sliding glass door in the kitchen. The sound of someone walking quietly and the click of that door is why, in the last 35 years, I have always locked everything. Story 65. Someone screamed, "Please don't kill me." This did not happen where I live, but when I was visiting family in another state years ago. Story 66. Bush curlews at 2 a.m. when I last visited my mum on the Sunshine Coast, Queensland, Australia. They sound like women screaming. I ran into my mum's bedroom, convinced she was being attacked. It scared her a lot. Story 67. A coyote is howling directly outside my windows. It woke me out of a deep sleep. I may have even fallen out of bed. Story 68. Aggressive knocking occurred at one window, then it moved to another and then another. A police officer's flashlight started shining through. It was a police officer. Story 69. A blood-curdling scream outside the yard at around 3 a.m. turns out. Story 70. I work at a group home for adults with developmental disabilities. A few years ago, I was working an evening shift with another female coworker. We had a resident who tended to wander, so there were sensors on all the doors and windows that alerted us if someone opened them. We were the only people in the house besides the residents, who were all asleep. We had a clear line of sight down the hallway, and the door leading from the hallway to the basement was locked, as were all the entrances to the house. The staff were the only people with the keys. We were sitting on the couch going over the activity logs when suddenly the loud, robotic voice of the exit sensor announced, "Basement door open." I cannot stress enough that no one was in the basement at the time, nor could anyone access it. The door leading outside from the basement was a heavy metal door that required effort to open. It was not windy that day, and even if it had been, the door was locked. Both of us looked at each other, and I saw all the color drain from my coworker's face. We ran to check the basement door. It was locked, verified that all the residents were asleep in bed. They were, and returned to the living room. We both decided that neither of us would go down to the basement, grab some heavy objects, and waited to hear if someone was walking up the stairs. No footsteps were ever heard, and we wrote it off as a strange glitch in the exit sensor, something that never happened before or since. Story 71. Cougar screaming like this. Story 72. I don't know what it actually was, but it was late at night, probably 1 a.m. We were smoking marijuana in a car parked in front of my aunt's house in South Sacramento. Honestly, we assumed it was a demon or paranormal entity. However, it could have been a wild feral cat or something similar. Terrified the three of us, and my cousin started the car and drove away. Story 73. The night I was eating chocolate on Sunday, I was awakened by a blood-curdling scream and found a spoon in my wife's back. Story 74. One time my boyfriend and I were staying in a hotel outside of St. Louis and had left our Amazon Fire Stick plugged into the TV connected to the public Wi-Fi. In the middle of the night, we were awakened by a man screaming at us. It was absolutely terrifying, and it did not occur to us until morning that it was a YouTube video someone had cast to the TV as a prank. Story 75. The roar of flames from my meth lab, my neighbor's lab going up in flames, almost taking my house with it. Story 76. My mirrored medicine cabinet was in the midst of being replaced. I couldn't get it to come out of the wall after removing the screws, so I decided to wait until tomorrow for a better attempt. It fell out in the middle of the night, and if it weren't for the mattress being on the floor during renovation, I would have really hurt myself. I literally flew off the bed before I was fully awake. Thankfully, the mirror didn't shatter, but it definitely freaked me out. Story 77. First thing I thought of was a rabbit screaming outside my window when I was watching my grandparents' house. They live basically in the woods. I looked outside with a flashlight and saw the neighbor's cat had caught the rabbit, ripped its chest open, and was eating its insides while it was still alive. It was an awful sound. Second, I thought someone had opened my attic door and come out right after I left the room the attic door is in at around 2 a.m. I thought I was being robbed or someone was trying to harm me. So I ran to my room, got my gun, and held up for about 30 minutes, waiting for my bedroom door to open. Nothing happened, and there were no more sounds, so I slowly checked. It turned out the wind had blown the attic door open and knocked some things down the stairs, and it just sounded scary at 2 a.m. Story 78. I was homeless for a while and lived in a tent in the woods. At night, there was something that made a very scary noise. I never saw what it was, but I called it the yak monster because it screamed like, yak-hack, yak-hack. It was very scary. Story 79. Lightning, or the sound of my relative screaming after finding out someone very close to them had died, just after finally seeing them after more than 10 years. Story 80. One time during sleep paralysis, I heard in my head the loudest booming voice imaginable say, "This is my house. At least I hope that was just in my head. Story 81. The cries of a mother-to-be having a miscarriage. I was with friends at a friend's house hanging out on a Saturday night. I went to bed and woke up at 3 a.m. to absolute mayhem. The girl's mother was there helping console her, and emergency medical services were in the driveway. We left quietly shortly thereafter. Story 82. The sound of my cat gagging close to my head. Nothing has ever pulled me out of a deep sleep like the fear of having to clean cat vomit off my bed at 3 a.m. Story 83. My sister lives in a remote area north of Tucson. They have a dry wash behind their backyard, which is a nature preserve. When the packs of coyotes came through yipping at 3 o'clock in the morning, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. It was a very scary sound. Story 84. A pack of wild dogs on the hunt. All different barks and yips, very eerie. Even coyotes were not as eerie as that. Story 85. A woman beside my ear told me to go to sleep. No one was there. Story 86. Water spray under pressure when everything is shut off. Story 87. I've actually had a few experiences. There was the time I heard my mom shout my name from outside when she was in town with friends. Another time, I heard someone slam their hand on the window behind me, but there was no one outside. There was also the time I was lying in bed about to sleep, and my old television, whose speaker volume had been fluctuating, played a sound. I heard "He's got your baby," as if it was right in my ear. That actually scared me, but it wasn't unexplainable. Story 88. Some kind of owl screamed in my backyard while my wife and I were watching Stranger Things Season 1. Damn. Story 89. I wasn't scared since I knew what it was, but I heard a group of Poro Secret Society men drumming hauntingly as they walked along the road toward the jungle in rural Sierra Leone in the dead of the night to perform their secret society rituals. There was no human sacrifice, but they literally dance around a fire. The secret society is illegal, so they probably would have been upset if they knew I had recorded a video of the procession. They were not performing any private rituals yet. Out of context, it sounded like ominous jungle drumming in the wilderness. Story 90. There are 3 events that equally scared me. 1. It was around 11:30 at night and it sounded like a giant bomb had gone off. It turned out the military base next to my house was stress testing an engine until it failed. They expected it to fail between 4 o'clock and 5:30 when the sound would not have carried or been as loud. It knocked me off the couch. 2. About 2 years ago, around 3:30 in the morning, I was fast asleep. Suddenly, my whole bedroom lit up bright blue. 2 seconds later came the loudest thunderclap I have ever heard. From deep sleep to wide awake, the bright light and the boom made me think someone had dropped a bomb. 3. At 2:30 in the morning, I heard gunshots followed by sirens. Not just a few. It sounded like John Rambo was on the block. The next day, the news made no mention of it. Story 91. I live close enough to a street intersection that a serious accident sounds like someone crashing into my house. It is rare but will wake you up at 3 a.m. Story 92. An elk bugling directly outside my window. I levitated about 3 feet out of bed in full cartoon style. Lovely sound in other circumstances. Story 93. A transformer exploded. I thought it was an alien invasion. Story 94. I was in Los Angeles during the Northridge earthquake. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning with the whole house shaking and things falling off shelves and breaking. Luckily, no one in our house was hurt, but it was quite the surprise. Story 95. We bought a house that had a built-in ironing board attached to the laundry room wall in its own cabinet. One night, it fell out when opening the door. It was the loudest noise we had heard in that house, and I jumped out of bed with my heart beating fast. We removed the ironing board after that and used the cabinet for snacks. Story 96. A couple of barred owls mating perhaps. I had never heard a barred owl before. I heard one the other night too. Story 97. A rat squealing loudly and a bang on the wall during deep silence. Story 98. Coming back home after sneaking out and finding a large wild cat blocking the basement door. I didn't see it at first but definitely heard it. Story 99. Kitchen cabinets full of dishes are falling off the wall onto the floor. Story 100. I thought I heard a woman screaming around 2 a.m. about 3 years ago. It scared me so much that my wife said she thinks I levitated for a couple of seconds. I looked outside and it was a bobcat. Scared me a lot. Story 101. Knocking from inside the basement. I ran out and did not stick around to find out what it was. Story 102. The air escaping the lungs of a deceased person as I rolled him into the body bag. I was a brand new nurse and did not know that could happen. Story 103. A whole group of coyotes surrounded my tent at night while I was camping. I had no idea they sounded like that. Story 104. I once woke up in the middle of the night to a creepy laugh, like a giggle from a horror movie. In retrospect, it was probably me because I used to laugh in my sleep. Story 105. So I was scrolling through Reddit one night before heading to sleep when I heard a screeching sound outside my house. Very loud. I ignored it at first, but it kept going. I got up to investigate, not really knowing what I would do if I found whatever it was. It was clearly an animal of some sort. I was just praying I wouldn't get attacked by some angry owl or something. The noise was coming from next door's garden. But where exactly? I was now prowling in next door's garden at 2 a.m. with a headlamp on, hoping they wouldn't see me since I'd only recently moved in. I checked along the fence. Nothing. Oh wait, it was on the other side of the fence. So I climbed over to find two hedgehogs. One stuck in the neighbor's son's football net, the other beside it screaming loudly. Nobody else was around. I ran back into my house, grabbed scissors, and returned. I started cutting the net to free the little one. Its companion had escaped, but I didn't have anything to catch him with, so I took off my top. Now I was really hoping my neighbors didn't come out, because here I was, prowling in their garden in pajama bottoms and a bra, with a headlamp on and scissors in my hand. One freed hedgehog also ran off. I didn't even know hedgehogs could make noises like that. It was an almost otherworldly scream, and it was very loud. I'm still amazed that nobody else seemed to hear it. Story 106. A large bronze decorative shoe fell off a dresser upstairs in my grandmother's house while she was in the hospital. It weighed about 8 pounds and no one was upstairs. I lived in the basement. I heard footsteps just after. Story 107. Silence. No insects. No birds. In the middle of a pitch-black forest with only a flashlight and the sound of my own breathing. Story 108. When I was 8 or 9 years old, it was around 2 a.m. I heard my mother and father grunting and moaning in their room. I thought something was wrong. I ran to their door, but it was locked. I knocked, and my father angrily told me to go back to bed. I thought he was hurting my mother, but since he was my father, and we were terrified of our fathers back then, I went back to bed. I went to sleep feeling anxious. The next morning, when I woke up, they seemed happy with each other. I was relieved and hoped whatever they had been upset about was resolved. It was only after puberty, when I started learning about sex, that I realized what I had been hearing that night. I had been genuinely terrified as a clueless 8-year-old. Story 109. What I assumed was a pack of coyotes wandering down our neighborhood street at around 2 a.m. It was just eerie with human-like noises and yips. Story 110. I had a fairly large tree branch fall on my gutters once. It sounded like a small bomb had gone off. Story 111. A gun went off at 3 a.m. next door. I rolled out of bed onto the floor and called 911. Police came and took someone away. Story 112. My neighbor brutally murdered his wife and was shot by the police. I was playing video games with my friends when my neighbors started arguing. I didn't hear what they were saying, but apparently, she didn't want to have sex and he did, according to another neighbor. After she refused, he started beating her. She was screaming and crying. Then it went quiet for 30 seconds, so I thought, it was over. No. After that I heard a bang and she started screaming, "Help me. He's going to kill me." I heard banging and screaming afterward. She shouted, "He has a knife. Please God. Help me, please." Then it was straight banging, screaming bloody murder, and the man yelling that she brought this on herself. While this was happening, I was frozen in my chair, terrified of what was going on just on the other side of the wall. Someone called the police, and when they arrived, I heard them screaming, "Drop the knife! The police then shot him because he wasn't listening. Apparently, it was bad. The neighbor across said that he peeked into the apartment and it was trashed and bloody, and said he saw the body too. The screams and yelling still play in my head to this day. Story 113. I have a glass sliding window facing my garden. One night, a man who I later found out had mental issues knocked on our window while my parents and I were watching a movie late at night. It was the first and only time I saw my dad genuinely scared. That, as a kid, was scarier to me than the knocking. Story 114. While camping one time, I heard a coyote that caught a rabbit. Hearing a rabbit scream for the first time, especially in the dark, was pretty scary. Story 115. Heavy rains and loud thunder occurred while I was lying in a tent on a camping trip. Needless to say, I went home the next morning. Story 116. My grandmother's voice at night seems to weaken and seek help. Story 117. Asian lady beetles are flying around my head. They invade my house during winter, and my room is the warmest, so they flock to the heat. I had nightmares during my first year of college that my room back home had been overrun by these insects. Asian lady beetles are invasive to the United States. Story 118. A woman drove into the side of our house. It was the loudest bang I have ever heard. She hit the earth surrounding our basement, which luckily stopped the entire car. We only lost a fence. If it had gone through, my father may have died since he was sleeping in the bedroom on the other side. Story 119. I accidentally left my door unlocked once. I live in an apartment building. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the man who lived 2 floors above me walked into my apartment. Story 120. We have coyotes in my area. Once they caught their prey, the mortal scream for about a minute was heartbreaking. It was not in front of my home, but at a distance. I felt heartbroken. Story 121. What sounded like a man whispering incoherently in my room. The door was closed, and before I heard that, the loose handle on my nightstand slid to one side. Freaky stuff. Story 122. I heard what sounded like a woman screaming as if she were being attacked. It was a bone-chilling sound. It turned out to be a mountain lion prowling the neighborhood. Story 123. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the forest outside the house we were renting in Guatemala. Second was a group of coyotes screaming outside my bedroom window at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up completely terrified but immediately realized what it was. Story 124. A ball bouncing in the hallway outside my door at 2 a.m. in a house with no one else besides me and my bedridden mother. Story 125. I forgot that my stair gate was down, and my dog was running around upstairs. He is not usually allowed up there without me, so it sounded like a person was doing things upstairs in the middle of the night while I was alone. Story 126. I grew up next to a hill on my highway, and every morning around 4 a.m., the trucks would start to roll with their engine brakes. I thought an asteroid had hit every time. Our pet peacocks had a habit of screaming in the middle of the night and sending new people off looking to save a dying girl too. Story 127. Mountain lion scream. The first time I heard one, I was 8 and camping in a tent in my granddad's front yard in the middle of nowhere. It sounded like a woman being murdered. Story 128. My neighbor murdered his wife. She screamed out the second-floor window before he shot her, then himself. Story 129. While on vacation at a fish camp, I heard my dad yelling that there was something wrong with my mom. I ran in and knew she had had a stroke 47 years ago, and I can still hear him. Story 130. Have you ever heard an angry woman wake you up by saying, "You son of a bitch"? True fear. Story 131. One night I was having a really weird dream. Not a nightmare, just weird. Suddenly, I was startled awake by the sound of a deep male voice quietly laughing in my ear. It took me about 2 seconds to realize it was just an auditory hallucination, but those were pretty scary 2 seconds. Story 132. Camping in the Serengeti. I woke up when a wildebeest vocalized outside my tent. Once I realized what it was, I was able to get back to sleep. Story 133. My daughter's toy randomly went off in the living room at midnight. I just knew I was in a horror movie and about to die. Story 134. I got up to use the bathroom at 4 a.m. a couple of weeks ago. I was sitting there and heard a man's voice, clear as a bell, outside the bathroom window, which is right next to the front door. I felt an adrenaline rush from head to toe and immediately stopped. Not wanting to make noise on the old floors, I tiptoed to the kitchen window but didn't see anyone. I looked for a while, then went to the front door, opened it, and peered around. There was something at my feet. Apparently, the Amazon delivery person was on his phone as he dropped my package off. Story 135. Mortar round. The first of the barrage landed very close on the other side of a concrete wall. I was fast asleep with no indication it was coming. Just a bang that moved the air out of the room and a cloud of dust everywhere. Then a few more came, just not quite as close. The number of times my sleep was disturbed by events like that still affects me 15 years later. Story 136. It sounds like an explosion going off right next to your ear, making you jolt up with your heart racing, ready to run outside, only to look around your room and find the night is still and quiet. Then you go back to sleep. Thanks, exploding head syndrome. Story 137. When my husband and I were in our early 20s and our eldest was a baby, we lived in a tiny 2-bedroom cottage. As he no longer needed night feedings, we moved our son into the crib in the nursery. This room was separated from our bedroom by a small, wide-open living and dining area. We did not use a monitor because I am a light sleeper, and we always left the bedroom doors open. One night, something woke me. I waited a moment and listened, thinking our baby might need a change. Instead of crying, I heard a woman laugh, clear as a bell, and it was coming from the nursery. My husband rolled toward me. I was closest to the door, and I realized he was awake too. I asked if he had heard it, and he said he had. I asked if he was going to check, and he said no. I got out of bed and tried to hurry to our son's room as quietly as possible. Our son was sleeping soundly. Nothing was out of place. There was no sign of anyone else in the house, and the laughter did not repeat. I rushed back to bed, feeling a terrible certainty that something was just waiting to pounce on me now that my back was turned. But nothing happened. I was angry that my husband did not check, but nothing ever came of it, and neither of us heard it again. It was just so creepy. I have never experienced anything like that before or since. We moved from the little cottage about 4 years later. Story 138. I was in a car accident a few years ago, and I will never forget the crunch of steel and the smell of the airbags. We were in standstill traffic at 1 a.m. and got hit by a distracted driver going 70 miles per hour. We were incredibly lucky that everyone walked away. Story 139. A friend and I were gaming, drinking, and smoking a little at my house. Around 3 a.m., we heard a wailing scream very close by. We thought maybe it was someone driving by with loud music. But then it happened again, more like a very loud groan. We went outside to investigate and saw a man lying in a pool of blood across the street, with part of his skull missing. We called emergency services and later found out that someone the victim knew chased him and hit his head with a brick. It was not a pleasant experience talking to several police officers while we were under the influence, but definitely a worse night for that man. Story 140. I was using the bathroom at around 11 o'clock, and I thought I heard my glass sliding door open. I sat there for 5 minutes wondering if I should check for an intruder in my house or spend the night in the bathroom. It turned out to be the ice maker from the refrigerator. Story 141. Elks bugling before I knew what that was. I moved from one remote location to another remote location. Elks were new in the second one. Nothing is more eerie than being alone in a double-wide trailer in the middle of nowhere and hearing ethereal screams come out of the darkness. Cops also showed up in the middle of the night with lights, sirens, and multiple cars racing around our barn. We were used to dead silence broken by elk or coyote calls. Sirens were terrifying because of how out of place they were. A sheriff knocked on our door and asked if anyone had harassed us because they had been chasing a fugitive, which had led them to our property. This, again, was in the middle of nowhere, so it was insane. My dad answered the door and told the sheriff he had not seen anyone. He made sure his gun was loaded, then went to sleep. Former Vietnam Marines are apparently unshaken. My mom and I stayed up all night watching for the fugitive who never appeared. We watched the police lights cross the property. My dad snored. Great times. Story 142. My ex and I heard what sounded like somebody digging a grave in gravel. It seemed to come from the empty field behind our house. We made a non-emergency call to the police, and the officer who arrived was as unsettled as we were. This was shortly after the news about Jeffrey Dahmer aired. I have to give the officer credit. He crept into the woods anyway. It turned out the man on the other side of the field was scraping shingles off his roof and working at night because it was cooler. Story 143. One evening, while my long-distance boyfriend was staying at my apartment in a big city, we decided to try some mushrooms. We started getting intimate late into the night when suddenly we heard a woman screaming, "Help! He is trying to kill me!" from downstairs outside. Took us a moment to realize what was happening. We opened the window to listen, and I knew who it was right away because the guy downstairs is a Nazi. I had to call the police while I was naked and under the influence. I'm glad I did. She left him and never came back. Story 144. Just before I fell completely asleep, I heard an extremely loud scream. Until today, I do not know what it was. Maybe I was already dreaming. My flatmates said they heard nothing. That was a creepy experience. Story 145. 1. I was walking to the hunting stand in the pitch black and fog when something ran off in front of me. It was not really that bad, but it was unsettling in the dark. 2. I heard random very clear singing in a rural area surrounded by native burial mounds. Story 146. So it comes with context. One day, I went to a foot massage spa thinking it was a normal massage parlor. I tend to not know certain things about life. For example, I thought rub and tugs were only in shady areas of town, but this spa was in a normal suburban outlet where I saw a family with parents and kids going into a restaurant a couple of stores down. So I thought it was a normal spa. I went in, and although I was usually underdressed but left my underwear on, the masseuse came in and took it off, which startled me, but we did the massage. Near the end, the masseuse asked about other services. I'm someone who doesn't engage in illegal activities. For instance, I would travel to Amsterdam to try weed for the first time rather than getting it from a friend who bought it somewhere local. Once I paid and left, I felt very paranoid. When you're paranoid, you think everyone looks shady or suspicious. The next night, I heard a serious rattling at my front door, which scared me a lot. I am not a gun owner, so I slept with a knife and the lights on. Realistically, it was likely cold weather and wind that caused the rattling. I had heard the noise before, but when I was very paranoid, it was the scariest noise ever. Over the weeks, I worried about legal issues and talked with a few friends who assured me that nothing was going to happen. This was 10 years ago. Story 147. A pack of coyotes taking down a deer. I don't know what was worse, the deer screaming or the coyotes yipping once it stopped. Story 148. I was working late one night. My wife went to bed, and our black Labrador Border Collie mix went with her and curled up at the foot of the bed like he did every night. At some point in the early hours of the morning, I came home and entered the bedroom quietly, hoping not to wake my wife. I made it about 3 steps before I heard the most spine-chilling growl coming from the bed. I stopped dead in my tracks and carefully reached for the light switch. Once he knew it was me, everything was fine, and my wife was not even mad at me for waking her up. Sure, he probably would have figured out it was me at some point, but the message in that moment was perfectly clear. This is my human here, and I will rip your throat out before I let you touch her. It was only for a moment, but in that moment I understood exactly why we fear the dark. Story 149. My girlfriend during one of her night terror episodes. It's like some exorcist scene. Story 150. In the woods on a designated hiking trail early in the morning, there was a moaning sound. No one else was around. It repeated at random intervals. I traced it to a dead branch that had fallen into the crotch of a different tree. The wind caused the branch to rake across the crotch like a violin bow, creating the eerie sound. Relieved, I left it for the next hiker to enjoy. Story 151. Pounding piano music or symphony music. It is a recurring nightmare that I have had since childhood. In the dream, it is total blackness and then suddenly menacing high-decibel classical music, and bam, I am awake and terrified. Story 152. My hollow body Gibson classic guitar fell off my wall about 2 weeks ago around 3 a.m. It absolutely scared me. Story 153. The audible sound of a child saying, "Hello," woke me right up. No children were in my bedroom. Story 154. Many people have already described creepy things, but one is the sound of a thunderstorm approaching very quickly and loudly. The first crash that shakes the house is always startling. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.